Picture this. You walk into a room full of military officers, your uniform crisp, your posture perfect, your mind sharp from years of strategic training. But the moment you speak, someone laughs. Not because you said something funny, but because they think you don't belong there. What they don't know could destroy their career. This is the story of Lieutenant General Sarah Martinez, a woman who climbed through the ranks of the military when few believed she could, who earned every star on her uniform through blood, sweat, and brilliance that most men could only dream of possessing. It's about the day a cocky colonel decided to humiliate her in front of a room full of officers, not knowing he was about to challenge someone who outranked him by 3 levels and commanded more respect than he would ever earn in his lifetime. Some mistakes you can recover from, others follow you for the rest of your career. This colonel was about to make the kind of mistake that ends careers and becomes a cautionary tale whispered in military academies for decades to come. But Sarah Martinez, she was about to remind everyone in that room why she wore those stars, and why underestimating someone based on appearance is the fastest way to discover just how little you actually know about power, respect, and real military leadership. The room fell silent. What happened next would be talked about for years. Sarah Martinez grew up in a small town in Texas where the biggest excitement was Friday night football games and the annual county fair. Her father worked at the local auto repair shop, and her mother taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. They lived in a modest house with a front porch that needed painting and a backyard where Sarah spent countless hours practicing military drills she learned from library books. Most kids her age were playing with dolls or video games, but Sarah was fascinated by military history. She read every book she could find about great military leaders, from Alexander the Great to George Patton. Her parents thought it was just a phase, like when she wanted to be a veterinarian after watching too many animal documentaries. They had no idea their daughter was already planning a career that would take her to the highest levels of military command. The first sign that Sarah was different came in high school. While other students were worried about prom dates and college parties, Sarah joined every leadership program available. She became student body president, captain of the debate team, and organized the most successful fundraising campaign in the school's history. Her teachers noticed something special about her, the way she could command attention without raising her voice, how she made difficult decisions with confidence that seemed far beyond her years. But it wasn't just her leadership skills that set her apart. Sarah had an incredible mind for strategy and logistics. During a school simulation exercise about disaster management, while other students panicked and argued, Sarah calmly organized teams, allocated resources, and created a communication system that impressed even the emergency management officials who were running the exercise. They told her teacher that they had never seen a teenager think so clearly under pressure. The military recruiter who visited her high school almost missed her entirely. He was looking for the obvious candidates, the big football players, and the kids who already talked about joining the service. Sarah was quiet, studious, and didn't fit the typical profile he expected. But when she approached him after his presentation with detailed questions about military strategy, leadership development, and career advancement opportunities, he realized he was talking to someone extraordinary. Sarah's parents were terrified when she announced her intention to join the military. They had hoped she would use her excellent grades to study business or medicine, something safe and predictable. The idea of their daughter in combat zones, surrounded by rough soldiers, facing dangers they couldn't even imagine, kept them awake at night. But Sarah had already made up her mind. And once she decided something, nothing could change her direction. The decision wasn't easy for Sarah either. She knew she would face challenges that male soldiers never had to consider. She had heard the stories, read the statistics, understood that she would have to work twice as hard to earn half the respect. But something deep inside her refused to let fear make her decisions. She believed that if she was good enough, smart enough, and strong enough, she could succeed anywhere. Her high school graduation was bittersweet. While her classmates talked about college dorms and sorority parties, Sarah was preparing for basic training. Some of her friends thought she was crazy, throwing away opportunities for a normal life. Others admired her courage but couldn't understand why anyone would choose such a difficult path. Sarah didn't try to explain it to them. She knew they wouldn't understand the burning desire she felt to serve, to lead, to make a difference in ways that went far beyond anything she could accomplish in a normal civilian career. The night before she left for basic training, Sarah sat on her front porch one last time, looking at the quiet street where she had grown up. She thought about all the books she had read, all the leadership lessons she had learned, all the dreams she had built in her mind about the person she wanted to become. She had no idea that in 25 years she would be one of the highest-ranking officers in the military, or that her journey would include moments of triumph and humiliation that would test every ounce of strength she possessed. Basic training hit Sarah like a hurricane. The physical challenges were brutal, but she had prepared for those. The mental games were harder, the constant pressure from drill sergeants who seemed determined to break her spirit. Some of the other recruits whispered that the instructors were harder on the women, looking for any excuse to wash them out. Sarah noticed it too, but instead of complaining, she used it as motivation to prove that she belonged there. The other female recruits looked to Sarah for leadership, even though she had no official authority. When one of them was struggling with the physical training, Sarah organized study groups and practice sessions. When another was dealing with harassment from male recruits, Sarah found ways to address the situation without creating bigger problems. The drill sergeants noticed her natural leadership abilities even as they continued to push her harder than everyone else. But the real test came during war games, complex exercises designed to simulate real combat situations. Sarah's unit was given an impossible scenario, outnumbered and outgunned, with limited resources and conflicting orders from superior officers. While other squad leaders panicked or followed orders blindly, Sarah analyzed the situation and came up with a strategy that turned their weaknesses into advantages. She realized that their small numbers made them mobile, their limited resources forced creative solutions, and the conflicting orders created opportunities to take initiative. Sarah coordinated with other squads, shared intelligence, and adapted her tactics based on changing conditions. Her unit not only survived the exercise but achieved objectives that the instructors thought were impossible. The commanding officer who debriefed Sarah's performance was Colonel James Harrison, a decorated veteran with 30 years of experience. He had seen thousands of recruits come through basic training, but he had never seen anyone think so strategically under pressure. He made a note in Sarah's file that would follow her throughout her career, recommending her for advanced leadership training and officer candidate school. Sarah finished basic training at the top of her class, but she knew this was just the beginning. Officer candidate school would be even more challenging, with higher expectations and more opportunities to fail. Some of the other graduates were heading to easy assignments, desk jobs that would give them steady careers without much risk. Sarah requested assignment to the most challenging programs available, including airborne training and advanced tactical courses. Her parents came to her graduation ceremony, proud but still worried about the path their daughter had chosen. They watched her receive awards for leadership and academic excellence, saw the way other soldiers respected her, noticed how confidently she carried herself in uniform. For the first time, they began to understand that this wasn't just a job for Sarah, it was her calling. The young woman who had grown up reading military history books on a front porch in Texas was now Second Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, with her whole career ahead of her. She had no idea that her journey would take her to war zones around the world, that she would make life and death decisions affecting thousands of soldiers, or that one day an arrogant colonel would try to humiliate her in front of a room full of officers, not knowing he was challenging someone who had earned every star on her uniform through years of dedication, sacrifice, and brilliance that few people could match. But all of that was still in the future. For now, Sarah was focused on the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove herself, the next step in a journey that would eventually make her one of the most respected leaders in military history. Sarah's first assignment as a second lieutenant was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where she was placed in charge of a logistics unit responsible for supply chain management. It wasn't the most glamorous position, and some of her classmates from officer candidate school had landed more prestigious roles in combat units or intelligence. But Sarah understood that logistics was the backbone of military operations, and she was determined to excel at whatever job she was given. The unit she inherited was struggling. Previous commanders had treated the assignment as a stepping stone to something better, never investing the time or energy needed to build an effective team. Morale was low, efficiency was poor, and other units complained constantly about delayed shipments and missing supplies. Sarah's commanding officer, Major Williams, made it clear that he expected her to fix the problems quickly, or face negative performance reviews that could end her career before it really started. Sarah spent her first week studying every aspect of the operation. From inventory management systems to transportation schedules, she discovered that the problems weren't caused by lazy soldiers or inadequate resources, but by inefficient processes and poor communication between different departments. That previous commanders had focused on following regulations exactly, rather than finding ways to make the system work better. Instead of simply giving orders, Sarah talked to every soldier in her unit, asking about their experiences and listening to their suggestions for improvement. Many of them were surprised that an officer cared about their opinions, and they shared ideas that had been ignored for years. Sarah realized that the people doing the actual work often had the best understanding of what needed to change. She implemented a new system that streamlined communication, reduced unnecessary paperwork, and created incentives for soldiers who found ways to improve efficiency. Within 3 months, her unit was outperforming every other logistics operation on the base. Other commanders began asking Sarah to share her methods, and Major Williams started using her unit as an example of excellence for the rest of the brigade. But Sarah's success came with unexpected challenges. Some of the male officers resented taking advice from a young woman who had been in the military for less than a year. During briefings and meetings, they would interrupt her presentations, question her data, or suggest that her methods wouldn't work in more demanding situations. Sarah learned to prepare for these challenges by having extra documentation ready and practicing responses to likely objections. The harassment wasn't always professional. Some officers made comments about her appearance, suggested that she had received promotions because of her gender rather than her abilities, or excluded her from informal gatherings where important information was shared. Sarah documented everything but rarely filed formal complaints, knowing that being labeled as a troublemaker could damage her career more than the harassment itself. Instead, she focused on building relationships with soldiers and officers who respected competence over politics. She found mentors who gave her honest feedback about her performance and advice about navigating military culture. Most importantly, she never let the negative treatment affect the quality of her work or her commitment to her soldiers. Sarah's breakthrough moment came during a major training exercise that simulated a large-scale deployment to a hostile environment. Multiple units were involved, with complex logistics requirements that included everything from ammunition supplies to medical equipment. The exercise was designed to test coordination between different commands, and everyone expected it to reveal serious problems that would need to be addressed before any real deployment. Most of the participating units struggled with the logistics challenges. Supply shortages caused delays, miscommunication led to confusion, and several operations had to be postponed or modified because necessary equipment wasn't available when needed. But Sarah's unit performed flawlessly, anticipating problems before they occurred and finding creative solutions to unexpected challenges. During one critical phase of the exercise, a simulated enemy attack damaged the main supply route, cutting off access to a forward operating base that needed immediate resupply. Other logistics units declared the mission impossible and requested that the exercise be modified. Sarah studied maps of the area, analyzed available transportation options, and developed an alternative plan that used smaller vehicles and multiple routes to deliver supplies safely. Her solution required precise timing and coordination between different teams, but Sarah had trained her soldiers to handle complex operations under pressure. They executed the mission perfectly, delivering not only the required supplies, but doing it faster than anyone thought possible. The exercise controllers, who had expected this scenario to demonstrate the difficulties of logistics in hostile environments, instead saw a textbook example of creative problem-solving and effective leadership. General Patricia Reynolds, who was observing the exercise, asked to meet with Sarah personally. General Reynolds was one of the highest-ranking women in the military and had a reputation for identifying promising officers early in their careers. She told Sarah that her performance during the exercise was remarkable, but more importantly, she had heard about the way Sarah treated her soldiers and the improvements she had made to her unit. General Reynolds became Sarah's most important mentor, providing guidance about career development and introducing her to other senior officers who could provide opportunities for advancement. She also warned Sarah about the challenges she would face as a woman in senior leadership positions, explaining that the higher she climbed in rank, the more resistance she would encounter from people who believed that women didn't belong in positions of authority. Sarah's promotion to first lieutenant came ahead of schedule based on her exceptional performance evaluations and recommendations from multiple superior officers. She was reassigned to a combat support role in Germany, where she would be responsible for coordinating logistics for operations across Europe. The assignment was considered a significant step up in responsibility and a clear indication that her career was on a fast track. The move to Germany presented new challenges. Sarah was working with international partners, dealing with different military traditions and languages, managing operations across multiple time zones. She was also one of the few American women in senior positions at her base, which made her highly visible and increased the pressure to perform perfectly at all times. Sarah's unit in Germany was responsible for supporting Special Operations Forces, which meant working with some of the most elite soldiers in the military. These units had extremely high standards and little patience for logistics problems that could compromise their missions. Sarah knew that any failure on her part could have life or death consequences for soldiers in dangerous situations. The pressure was intense, but Sarah thrived in the environment. She developed relationships with special operations commanders who initially were skeptical about working with a logistics officer, especially a young woman. But her ability to anticipate their needs, solve problems quickly, and deliver results exactly when needed earned their respect and trust. During a classified operation in Eastern Europe, Sarah's logistical planning was crucial to the mission's success. The operation required moving equipment and personnel across multiple borders without detection, coordinating with intelligence agencies, and maintaining communication security throughout the process. Sarah worked 18-hour days for 2 weeks, managing every detail of the complex operation. When the mission was completed successfully, the Special Operations Commander wrote a commendation letter that described Sarah's contribution as essential to the operation's success. The letter was forwarded to senior Pentagon officials and became part of Sarah's permanent record. More importantly, word spread throughout the Special Operations community that Sarah Martinez was someone they could count on when stakes were highest. Sarah's promotion to captain came with assignment to the War College, an advanced education program for officers being prepared for senior leadership positions. The program was highly competitive, with only the most promising officers selected for participation. Sarah was one of only 3 women in her class, and the only one under 30 years old. The War College curriculum covered strategic planning, international relations, military history, and leadership theory. Sarah excelled in all areas, but she was particularly gifted at strategic analysis and war gaming exercises. She could see patterns and connections that other students missed, anticipate consequences of decisions several moves ahead, and develop comprehensive plans that accounted for multiple variables and potential complications. Her thesis project examined logistics challenges in modern warfare, proposing new methods for supply chain management in hostile environments. The paper was so impressive that it was classified and distributed to senior Pentagon officials for consideration in actual operational planning. Sarah's professors recommended her for immediate promotion and assignment to positions typically reserved for more senior officers. When Sarah graduated from the War College, she was promoted to major and assigned to the Pentagon, where she would work directly with senior military leadership on strategic planning. She was only 32 years old, making her one of the youngest majors in the Army and putting her on track for continued rapid advancement. But success at senior levels meant increased scrutiny and higher expectations. Sarah knew that every decision she made would be analyzed and critiqued by people looking for any sign of weakness or incompetence. She also knew that there were officers who resented her rapid advancement and would be looking for opportunities to undermine her authority. Sarah was ready for these challenges. She had spent years preparing for senior leadership, studying under excellent mentors, proving herself in increasingly difficult assignments. She understood that being a woman in the military meant working harder than her male counterparts, but she also knew that her unique perspective and proven abilities gave her advantages that others didn't possess. The young woman who had started her career managing supplies at Fort Bragg was now Major Sarah Martinez, working in the Pentagon and being considered for assignments that would put her in charge of thousands of soldiers. Her journey was far from over, and the most challenging tests of her leadership were still ahead of her. Sarah's Pentagon assignment was supposed to last 3 years, giving her experience in strategic planning and policy development that would prepare her for senior command positions. But after 18 months, the global security situation changed dramatically. Regional conflicts in the Middle East were escalating, and the military needed experienced officers who could manage complex operations under extreme pressure. Sarah received orders that would send her back to field operations, this time as a battalion commander in Afghanistan. The assignment was both an honor and a challenge. Very few officers received battalion commands at such a young age, and even fewer women had commanded combat units in active war zones. Sarah would be responsible for 800 soldiers, multiple forward operating bases, and coordination with Allied forces across a region the size of several American states. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure wasn't an option. Sarah's predecessor had been relieved of command after a series of incidents that damaged morale and compromised mission effectiveness. The battalion had lost confidence in its leadership, and several senior non-commissioned officers had requested transfers. Sarah arrived to find a unit that was technically competent but demoralized, going through the motions without the esprit de corps that makes military units truly effective. Her first priority was meeting with every company commander and senior NCO in her battalion. These conversations weren't formal briefings but honest discussions about the challenges they faced, the resources they needed, and their concerns about the mission. Sarah listened more than she talked, asking questions and taking notes rather than immediately proposing solutions. What she discovered was that the previous commander had been more concerned with following regulations precisely than with accomplishing the mission effectively. He had created an atmosphere where soldiers were afraid to take initiative, where reporting problems was discouraged, and where communication between units was formal and inefficient. The battalion was functioning, but it wasn't performing at the level needed for success in a combat environment. Sarah immediately began changing the culture. She established new communication protocols that encouraged information sharing between units, created regular forums where soldiers could raise concerns or suggest improvements, and made it clear that she valued honest feedback over comfortable lies. She also spent time with soldiers in forward positions, eating in mess halls, participating in training exercises, and showing that she was willing to share the same risks and hardships as the people under her command. The changes didn't happen overnight, but gradually the battalion began to show improvement. Mission completion rates increased, coordination between units became smoother, and morale surveys showed significant improvement in soldier satisfaction and confidence in leadership. Other battalion commanders began asking Sarah about her methods, and her superior officers took notice of the transformation. Sarah's real test came during Operation Mountain Shield, a complex mission designed to disrupt enemy supply lines while protecting civilian populations in disputed territory. The operation required coordination between multiple battalions, air support, intelligence assets, and Afghan government forces. Previous similar operations had achieved limited success, often causing civilian casualties that damaged relationships with local populations. Sarah's battalion was assigned the most dangerous part of the operation, clearing suspected enemy positions in mountainous terrain where visibility was limited and the risk of ambush was high. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces were well entrenched and heavily armed, with possible support from foreign fighters who had extensive combat experience. Rather than following standard tactics, Sarah developed an innovative approach that used smaller, more mobile units to gather intelligence and identify enemy positions before committing larger forces. She coordinated closely with intelligence officers to understand enemy movement patterns and worked with psychological operations specialists to minimize impact on civilian populations. The operation began at dawn on a cold October morning. Sarah positioned herself at a command post where she could monitor communications from all her units while maintaining contact with higher headquarters and supporting assets. As reports came in from reconnaissance teams, she began to see that enemy positions were different from what intelligence had predicted, requiring real-time adjustments to the operational plan. When Alpha Company encountered unexpected resistance at a key checkpoint, Sarah had to make a critical decision. The original plan called for reinforcements to be sent from Bravo Company, but Sarah realized that this would leave another area vulnerable to enemy counterattack. Instead, she coordinated with artillery support to suppress enemy positions while Alpha Company maneuvered to a more defensible location. The decision was risky and required precise timing, but it worked perfectly. Alpha Company was able to neutralize the enemy position without casualties, while other units continued their missions according to the modified plan. Sarah's ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions impressed both her subordinates and her superiors, who were monitoring the operation from higher headquarters. But the real test came when Charlie Company reported that they had encountered a group of civilians who were fleeing the combat area and needed immediate assistance. The civilians included families with small children who were caught between military forces and had nowhere safe to go. Standard protocol called for turning civilians over to Afghan government officials, but Sarah recognized that this could put innocent people at risk. Sarah made the decision to temporarily halt military operations in that sector, while their soldiers provided assistance to the civilians, including medical aid for injured children and coordination with humanitarian organizations to ensure safe passage to refugee centers. The decision delayed completion of her battalion's mission by several hours, but it prevented civilian casualties and demonstrated the kind of leadership that builds trust with local populations. The operation was ultimately successful, with Sarah's battalion achieving all objectives while suffering minimal casualties and avoiding harm to civilians. The after-action reports praised her tactical flexibility and her ability to balance military objectives with humanitarian concerns. More importantly, intelligence reports over the following weeks showed that local populations were providing more information about enemy activities, largely because of the positive interactions during Operation Mountain Shield. Sarah's performance during the operation earned her a Bronze Star and recommendations for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. The promotion came 6 months ahead of schedule, making her one of the youngest lieutenant colonels in the Army. But with the promotion came new challenges and increased expectations. As a lieutenant colonel, Sarah was assigned to brigade-level operations, with responsibility for coordinating between multiple battalions and managing relationships with higher headquarters. She was also selected for special assignments that took advantage of her unique combination of combat experience, strategic thinking ability, and proven leadership skills. One of these assignments involved working with international partners to develop new approaches to counterinsurgency operations. Sarah traveled throughout the region, meeting with military leaders from allied nations and learning about different tactical approaches and cultural considerations. Her reports and recommendations influenced policy decisions at the highest levels of military command. Sarah's success in international assignments led to her selection for the Army's most prestigious leadership development program, designed to prepare officers for general rank. The program included advanced education in strategic studies, assignments to joint service operations, and exposure to political and diplomatic aspects of military leadership. During this program, Sarah worked directly with some of the most senior military leaders in the country, participating in strategic planning sessions and contributing to policy discussions that would affect military operations worldwide. Her insights were particularly valued because of her combination of recent combat experience and advanced education in strategic studies. The program culminated with Sarah's promotion to colonel and assignment as brigade commander, responsible for over 3,000 soldiers and multiple complex missions. She was only 38 years old, making her one of the youngest colonels in the Army, and putting her on track for consideration for general rank before age 45. But Sarah's rapid advancement hadn't gone unnoticed by everyone. Some officers who had been in the military longer resented her quick promotions, suggesting that she had received favorable treatment because of her gender rather than her abilities. Others questioned whether someone so young could handle the responsibilities of senior command, particularly in situations involving life and death decisions. Sarah was aware of these criticisms but refused to let them affect her performance or confidence. She had earned every promotion through exceptional performance, and she had the documentation and recommendations to prove it. More importantly, she had the respect and loyalty of the soldiers under her command, which was the ultimate measure of leadership effectiveness. Her new assignment as brigade commander would take her to a base in Virginia, where she would be responsible for training and preparing units for deployment to various global hotspots. The assignment was considered crucial preparation for general rank, as it required skills in large-scale management, strategic planning, and coordination with other military and civilian agencies. Sarah approached her new command with the same attention to detail and commitment to excellence that had characterized her entire career. She spent weeks studying the brigade's history, current capabilities, and upcoming missions. She met with every battalion commander and key staff officer, establishing relationships and understanding the unique challenges of each unit. But Sarah had no idea that her new assignment would bring her into contact with Colonel Richard Hawthorne, an officer whose arrogance and prejudice would lead to a confrontation that would be remembered throughout the military for years to come. Hawthorne had been passed over for promotion multiple times and blamed his lack of advancement on political correctness and favoritism toward women and minorities. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test everything Sarah had learned about leadership, dignity, and the importance of maintaining professionalism, even in the face of deliberate disrespect. The young woman who had started her career managing supplies was now Colonel Sarah Martinez, one of the most respected officers in her generation. But she was about to face a challenge that would require all her strength and wisdom to handle effectively. The monthly Joint Operations Briefing at Fort Belmont was supposed to be a routine meeting where different unit commanders shared information about upcoming training exercises and coordination requirements. Sarah had attended dozens of similar briefings over the years, and she expected this one to follow the standard format of status reports, resource requests, and scheduling discussions. She had no idea that this particular meeting would become one of the most talked about incidents in recent military history. Sarah arrived at the conference room 15 minutes early, as was her habit. She preferred to review materials one final time and engage in informal conversations with other officers before formal proceedings began. The room was already half full with colonels and lieutenant colonels from various units, most of whom she knew professionally if not personally. The atmosphere was relaxed, with the easy camaraderie that develops between officers who have worked together for extended periods. As other attendees arrived, Sarah noticed Colonel Richard Hawthorne enter the room. Hawthorne was a career infantry officer who had been in the military for 26 years without achieving the promotions he believed he deserved. He commanded a training battalion that had received mediocre performance evaluations under his leadership, and he was known for his complaints about what he called the military's focus on political correctness over combat effectiveness. Sarah had encountered Hawthorne briefly at previous meetings, but they had never worked together directly. She knew his reputation for making controversial comments about diversity initiatives and women in combat roles, but she had never experienced his behavior personally. Other officers had warned her that Hawthorne was bitter about his lack of advancement and often took out his frustrations on people he perceived as having received preferential treatment. The briefing began with routine administrative matters, updates on training schedules, and reports from different unit commanders about their current status and upcoming needs. Sarah presented information about her brigade's readiness levels and coordination requirements for an upcoming joint exercise with international partners. Her presentation was crisp, professional, and well received by the other attendees. When the formal presentations were completed, General Morrison, who was presiding over the meeting, opened the floor for questions and additional discussion. This was typically a time for clarifying details, addressing potential scheduling conflicts, and ensuring that all units understood their roles in upcoming operations. Colonel Hawthorne raised his hand and was recognized by General Morrison. Instead of asking a question about operational matters, Hawthorne stood up and made a comment that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "General Morrison, I have a concern about the upcoming joint exercise that I think needs to be addressed," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "I'm wondering if we've really thought through the leadership assignments for this operation. Some of our international partners come from cultures that have traditional views about military leadership, and I'm concerned about how they'll react to taking direction from, well, let's say, non-traditional commanders." The room fell silent. Everyone understood exactly what Hawthorne was implying, even though he had been careful not to say it directly. He was questioning whether foreign military leaders would respect orders from female officers, particularly Sarah, who was one of the senior commanders for the exercise. General Morrison's expression immediately became serious. "Colonel Hawthorne, if you have specific concerns about operational coordination, I suggest you address them through proper channels after this meeting. This isn't the appropriate forum for speculation about our partners' attitudes." But Hawthorne wasn't finished. He had clearly planned this moment and wasn't going to be deterred by General Morrison's attempt to shut down the discussion. "With respect, General, I think this is exactly the appropriate forum, since we're discussing an operation that involves multiple units and international coordination," Hawthorne continued. "I've worked with some of these foreign military leaders before, and I know they have certain expectations about command structure and leadership experience. I'm just saying that maybe we should consider whether our current leadership assignments are the most effective for mission success." Other officers in the room shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some stared at the table in front of them. Others looked directly at Hawthorne with expressions of disbelief. Everyone knew that this was completely inappropriate, but no one was sure how to respond to such a blatant challenge to a fellow officer's authority. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but her expression remained calm and professional. She had encountered this type of situation before, though never so publicly or so deliberately provocative. She knew that her response would be remembered by everyone in the room, and that how she handled this moment would affect her relationships with these officers for years to come. General Morrison tried once more to control the situation. "Colonel Hawthorne, I'm going to ask you to stop this line of discussion immediately. If you have legitimate operational concerns, you can submit them in writing after this meeting." Hawthorne's response made it clear that he had no intention of backing down. "General, I'm just trying to ensure mission success. We all know that some officers have received rapid promotions based on factors other than traditional military qualifications. I'm suggesting that when we're dealing with foreign partners who may not understand our promotion policies, we should consider putting our most experienced and frankly most respected officers in leadership positions." The insult was unmistakable now. Hawthorne was publicly suggesting that Sarah's rapid advancement was due to her gender rather than her qualifications, and that foreign military leaders would not respect her authority. The room was completely silent, with all eyes moving between Hawthorne and Sarah. Sarah stood up slowly, her posture perfectly erect, her expression calm but serious. When she spoke, her voice was clear and controlled, carrying easily across the room without any hint of anger or defensiveness. "Colonel Hawthorne, I appreciate your concern for mission success." "I share that concern completely," Sarah began. "Since you've raised questions about leadership qualifications and experience, I think it might be helpful to review the credentials of the officers assigned to this operation." Sarah paused briefly, letting her words settle before continuing. "I noticed that you mentioned traditional military qualifications and respect from foreign partners. In my experience working with international military leaders in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Eastern Europe, they tend to evaluate officers based on combat experience, strategic thinking ability, and proven leadership under pressure rather than on assumptions about gender or appearance." Several officers in the room nodded slightly, recognizing that Sarah was handling an impossible situation with remarkable composure. But Hawthorne wasn't finished with his attack. "That's all very nice, Colonel Martinez, but the reality is that some of us have been in the military long enough to remember when promotions were based primarily on merit and battlefield performance rather than on meeting diversity quotas," Hawthorne said, his voice becoming more aggressive. "I'm just suggesting that we should consider whether rapid advancement through the ranks always translates to the kind of respect and authority needed for complex international operations." The insult was now completely explicit. Hawthorne was publicly stating that Sarah's promotions were based on her gender rather than her merit, in front of a room full of senior officers including General Morrison. It was the kind of career-ending mistake that most officers would never consider making, but Hawthorne's bitterness and frustration had clearly overcome his judgment. Sarah remained standing, her composure unchanged, but something in her expression shifted slightly. The other officers in the room recognized the look of someone who had just made a decision about how to respond to an unacceptable challenge. "Colonel Hawthorne, you raise an interesting point about merit and battlefield performance," Sarah said, her voice still calm but carrying a new edge of authority. "Since you seem concerned about qualifications for this operation, perhaps we should review the relevant experience of the officers involved." Sarah began walking slowly around the conference table as she spoke, her movement deliberate and controlled. "This operation requires coordination with Special Operations Forces, experience with joint international commands, and proven ability to manage complex logistics under combat conditions. Are those the qualifications you think we should prioritize?" Hawthorne was beginning to realize that this conversation wasn't going the way he had planned, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. "Those are exactly the kind of qualifications I'm talking about, Colonel. Traditional military leadership experience that earns genuine respect from troops and allies." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face Hawthorne directly. When she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable tone of command authority that every officer in the room recognized and respected. "I'm glad we agree on the importance of those qualifications, Colonel Hawthorne. Since you've made this a public discussion about command authority and respect, I think it's appropriate to clarify exactly who has the qualifications to lead this operation." The room was completely silent now, with everyone sensing that something significant was about to happen. General Morrison was watching Sarah carefully, his expression suggesting that he was curious to see how she would handle this unprecedented situation. "Colonel Hawthorne, you mentioned traditional military qualifications and battlefield experience. According to my records, you have served honorably for 26 years, primarily in training and administrative positions. Your combat deployments include one tour in Iraq in a logistics support role, is that correct?" Hawthorne's face was beginning to show uncertainty, but he answered defensively. "That's correct, Colonel. And I've been responsible for training thousands of soldiers who went on to serve with distinction in combat operations." Sarah nodded respectfully. "That's important work, Colonel, and I respect your service. But since you've raised questions about qualifications for this particular operation, I think it's worth noting that this mission requires specific types of experience that not all officers possess." Sarah paused, letting the tension build before continuing. "The operation involves coordination with British SAS units, French Special Operations Forces, and German KSK commandos. It requires someone who has worked directly with these units in combat environments and earned their professional respect through shared operations." She began walking again, her movement creating a sense of theatrical tension that had every officer in the room completely focused on her words. "The operation also requires experience with classified special operations, familiarity with international intelligence sharing protocols, and proven ability to make strategic decisions under extreme pressure while managing units spread across multiple countries and time zones." Sarah stopped and looked directly at Hawthorne. "These are very specific qualifications, Colonel. Not many officers have all of them. In fact, I can think of only a few officers in this entire region who have the complete set of experiences needed for this particular mission." Hawthorne was beginning to look uncomfortable, sensing that Sarah was building towards something he wasn't going to like. But his pride wouldn't let him back down from the confrontation he had started. "I'm sure there are several qualified officers available for this assignment, Colonel Martinez. My point is that we should choose leadership based on proven military effectiveness rather than on other factors." Sarah smiled slightly, and several officers in the room recognized the expression of someone who was about to deliver a decisive response to an unacceptable challenge. Sarah's smile was not warm or friendly. It was the expression of a professional who had just been handed an opportunity to demonstrate exactly why underestimating people based on assumptions was a career-limiting mistake. The room was so quiet that the air conditioning system seemed loud, and every officer present could sense that they were about to witness something extraordinary. "You're absolutely right, Colonel Hawthorne. We should choose leadership based on proven military effectiveness and specific qualifications for the mission at hand," Sarah said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was about to reveal. "Since you've made this a public discussion about credentials and respect, I think everyone here would benefit from understanding exactly what qualifications the leadership for this operation actually possesses." Sarah moved to the front of the room, positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly. General Morrison was watching with intense interest, his expression suggesting that he knew something the others didn't but was curious to see how Sarah would handle the situation.
"Colonel Hawthorne, you mentioned traditional military qualifications and battlefield experience.
Let me share some specific details about the qualifications that will be leading this joint operation. Sarah continued, her tone becoming more formal and authoritative. The senior American officer for this operation has completed 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan, including 18 months with Special Operations Task Forces conducting classified missions behind enemy lines. During these deployments, this officer planned and executed over 200 combat operations, including several that involve coordination with the exact same international special forces units we'll be working with in this exercise. Sarah paused, noting that Hawthorne's expression was beginning to change as he started to realize where this conversation was heading. This officer has also completed advanced training with British SAS units at Hereford, cross-training with French Special Operations Forces in Djibouti, and joint operations planning with German KSK commandos during NATO exercises. These experiences created working relationships and mutual respect that will be crucial for mission success. Several officers in the room were beginning to lean forward in their chairs, recognizing that Sarah was building towards something significant. Colonel Hawthorne was starting to look distinctly uncomfortable, but he was committed to his position and couldn't back down without losing face completely. The officer selected to lead this operation has also received multiple combat decorations, including the Bronze Star with Valor for Actions Under Fire, the Meritorious Service Medal for exceptional leadership during complex operations, and commendations from foreign military leaders for professional excellence in joint operations, Sarah continued. Additionally, this officer holds advanced degrees in international relations and strategic studies, has graduated from the War College with distinction, and has completed specialized training in counterterrorism operations, hostage rescue techniques, and cultural sensitivity for international operations. Sarah's voice became even more formal and commanding as she continued her presentation. Perhaps most importantly for this specific mission, this officer has previously commanded successful joint operations involving these exact same international partners, earning their professional respect and trust through demonstrated competence under pressure. The room was completely silent, with every officer hanging on Sarah's words. General Morrison was now smiling slightly, recognizing exactly what was happening, and appreciating Sarah's masterful handling of an impossible situation. Now, Colonel Hawthorne, since you've expressed concerns about whether our international partners will respect American leadership for this operation, I think it's important to note that several of these foreign commanders have specifically requested to work with this particular American officer again, based on their previous successful collaborations.
Sarah paused,
letting the impact of her words sink in before delivering her final point. In fact, Colonel Hawthorne, the British SAS commander for this operation, sent a personal message stating that he looked forward to working with the American officer again, describing their previous collaboration as exemplary professional military leadership, and noting that this officer's strategic thinking and tactical flexibility had been crucial to previous mission success. Hawthorne was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and avoiding eye contact with other officers in the room. He was beginning to realize that he had badly miscalculated the situation, but he still didn't understand the full extent of his mistake. So you see, Colonel Hawthorne, I can assure you that the leadership for this operation has been selected based precisely on the traditional military qualifications you mentioned: proven combat effectiveness, demonstrated leadership under pressure, and earned respect from both American forces and international partners. Sarah moved closer to where Hawthorne was sitting, her posture straight and commanding, her voice clear and authoritative. In fact, Colonel Hawthorne, since you seem so concerned about qualifications and respect, I should probably mention that the officer selected to lead this operation has also been recommended for promotion to Brigadier General, making this one of their final assignments before assuming responsibilities at the general officer level. Several officers in the room exchanged glances, beginning to understand the implications of what Sarah was revealing. But Hawthorne still didn't grasp the full situation. That's all very impressive, Colonel Martinez, but I still think we should consider whether a more senior officer might be appropriate for such an important operation, Hawthorne said stubbornly, apparently unaware that he was digging himself into an even deeper hole. Sarah's expression became very serious, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable tone of command authority that left no room for argument or discussion. Colonel Hawthorne, I appreciate your concern about seniority and qualifications. Since you've made this such a public issue, I think it's time to clarify exactly who will be in command of this operation and what their actual rank and authority level is. Sarah walked back to her position at the front of the room, where everyone could see her clearly. General Morrison was now watching with obvious anticipation, and several other officers were beginning to smile as they realized what was about to happen. Colonel Hawthorne, you seem to be under the impression that I'm just another colonel participating in this operation. I think there's been a misunderstanding that needs to be corrected. Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document that she held up for everyone to see. This is the official order appointing the senior American commander for this joint operation. Perhaps you'd like to know who has been selected for this position that you're so concerned about. The room was absolutely silent now, with everyone focused completely on Sarah and the document in her hand. The Department of the Army, after reviewing the qualifications and experience of available officers, has appointed Lieutenant General Sarah Martinez as the senior American commander for this joint international operation.
The silence in the room was deafening.
Several officers' mouths dropped open. Others sat back in their chairs with expressions of amazement, and Colonel Hawthorne went completely pale. Lieutenant General Martinez? Sarah repeated, her voice now carrying the full authority of her actual rank. That would be me, Colonel Hawthorne. The officer whose qualifications you've been questioning is actually Lieutenant General Martinez, and you've been speaking to a 3-star general as if she were a peer. General Morrison was now grinning openly, clearly enjoying the moment. Several other officers were shaking their heads in disbelief at Hawthorne's massive error in judgment. Sarah continued, her voice calm but commanding. So when you expressed concerns about whether international partners would respect American leadership, you were actually questioning the qualifications of an officer who outranks you by 3 levels and has more combat experience, advanced training, and international respect than most officers achieve in entire careers. Hawthorne looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The magnitude of his mistake was finally becoming clear to him, and he was realizing that he had just publicly insulted and challenged a 3-star general in front of a room full of witnesses. Furthermore, Colonel Hawthorne, when you suggested that my rapid promotion was due to factors other than merit, you were actually accusing the Department of the Army, multiple promotion boards, and dozens of senior officers of corrupting the promotion process. That's a very serious allegation that I'm sure you'll want to reconsider. Sarah's tone became even more formal and official. Colonel Hawthorne, since you seem so concerned about traditional military qualifications and proper respect for authority, I think this would be an excellent time for you to demonstrate your understanding of military protocol and chain of command. The room was so quiet that everyone could hear Hawthorne swallow hard before he managed to speak. Lieutenant General Martinez, I apologize for my comments. I was not aware of your actual rank or assignment, and I spoke inappropriately. Hawthorne said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded curtly. Apology noted, Colonel. However, your comments raised some serious concerns about your judgment and your understanding of professional military behavior. Questioning the superior officer's qualifications in public, making allegations about promotion procedures, and suggesting that gender rather than merit influences command assignments, are all matters that will need to be addressed through appropriate channels. General Morrison finally spoke up. Lieutenant General Martinez is correct, Colonel Hawthorne. Your comments today were completely inappropriate and will be the subject of a formal review. You're dismissed from this meeting, and you'll report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning to discuss your conduct. Hawthorne stood up slowly, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger at his own stupidity. As he walked toward the door, every officer in the room watched him in complete silence. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to break the spell, and several officers began talking quietly among themselves. General Morrison addressed the room. Gentlemen, and Lieutenant General Martinez, what just occurred here is an excellent reminder about the importance of treating all officers with appropriate respect and professionalism, regardless of assumptions we might make about their background or qualifications. Sarah remained standing at the front of the room, her expression professional but serious. General Morrison, thank you for your support. I think this incident illustrates why our military's commitment to merit-based advancement and equal opportunity is so important. When we judge officers by their performance rather than their appearance, we get the strongest possible leadership. Over the following weeks, word of the confrontation spread throughout the military community. Colonel Hawthorne was quietly reassigned to a desk position where he couldn't damage his career any further, and he retired within 18 months without any additional promotions. His name became synonymous with the dangers of making assumptions about fellow officers and the importance of treating everyone with professional respect. Sarah's handling of the situation became a case study in military leadership schools, demonstrating how to respond to inappropriate behavior with dignity and professionalism while clearly establishing authority and expectations. The incident also reinforced her reputation as an officer who could handle any challenge with grace and competence. The joint international operation that had been the subject of the original discussion was completed successfully under Sarah's leadership, with foreign commanders once again requesting opportunities to work with her in future operations. Her promotion to Lieutenant General was confirmed shortly afterward, along with assignment to positions that would prepare her for even higher levels of responsibility. Years later, when Sarah became one of the youngest four-star generals in military history, many people remembered the day when a bitter colonel made the mistake of challenging someone he didn't recognize, not knowing he was confronting an officer whose qualifications, experience, and authority far exceeded anything he could imagine. The story became a legend, retold in officers' clubs and military academies as a reminder that in the military, as in life, it's dangerous to judge people by their appearance rather than their achievements.